Good morning, everyone. I see the participation list growing. Welcome to our presentation during Alumni Celebration Month here in October 2021. I'm pleased to present Dr. Jordan Lewis from the Duluth campus.
All right, well, thank you. It's an honor to be here, and thank you for the invitation to share about my work. So I'll start off with an introduction. Ong ong, hello, hello. My name is Jordan Lewis, and I'm Unungung from the native village of Naknek. I will give a little bit more background about myself. I am a social worker by training and a community psychologist. All my work has been focused on working with older adults, looking at their successful aging process or how they define it. The title of this presentation is Successful Aging in Alaska Native Elders Across Diverse Regions. This work I've been doing for over the past 10 years, funded by the National Science Foundation. And so this presentation will give you a glimpse of what we've learned over the past 10 plus years. And so feel free to put any questions in the chat box. I will make sure we can get to those at the end of the presentation. And I look forward to talking to you more. So to start off with, as a social worker, as someone who grew up in a native village of, I think when I was younger, it was 300 people, was surrounded by my elders. I grew up volunteering and helping out elders in my community. I grew up with both sets of my great-grandparents and my grandparents in my life until high school. So I had a really big influence by older adults. And so I was raised with this notion that as you get older, you step into these positions of eldership, of respect, of honor. You step into leadership roles. And that's what I thought happened until I started doing my college education, graduate school, immersing myself in the literature, as academia makes us do, and started realizing that we are in a very youth-oriented society. We do a lot of things to keep ourselves looking younger. And so it caused me to start thinking about what do other people think about when you think about growing older, what comes to mind? As I had mentioned, I think about fulfilling this important role in your family and your community. Much more positive things than you would see on the shelves of Barnes & Noble or your local grocery store on the cover of magazines. So you don't have to respond right now, but just a question to think about is, what comes to mind when you think about growing old in your own life? What does that look like? And what are some key terms that come to mind? So as a gerontologist in my MSW program, I was one of 3 in the gerontology concentration. Very few, I think there's a handful of Indigenous gerontologists in the country, very few geriatricians as well. But there's actually a word for it. There's gerontoscophobia, is the fear of getting old. And so this is a real phobia people have. And as you know, science is moving forward with a lot of anti-aging techniques, technology using to try to figure out, can we stay young forever? There's an interesting TED talk by a scientist in Europe where he's attempting to develop a pill that if I were to take it today, I would stay this age forever. He's looking at how the biology of aging could be stopped. So this is actually an area of study that people are looking at. So when I started my research, there was a lot of interests around successful aging. What can we do to stay young? This was in the early 2000s. As you can see here are some examples. Mixed with successful aging, there's also, can we reverse aging? Are you ready to retire? Can we stop aging? Across a variety of different medias, whether it's magazines or books, TV shows, the news, and research. So looking at asking the general population, of course, these do not represent the entire population, but the Pew Research Center asked people in the public, when you think about growing old today, what are some markers or milestones you think of as people get old? And you can see there 79% of the participants said turning 85. If you think about what that answer would have been 50 years ago, 65 was much older. And that's due to we're living longer, our lifespan's extending. And so as you look down this list, as the percent of people who respond and give these answers get smaller, a majority of these are negative or things you lose as a result of growing older. Can't live independently, no longer can drive a car, you forget familiar names, you have gray hair, One benefit is having grandchildren, which is much smaller percentage than the larger ones of, not living independently, which is 76% of the people they surveyed. In the same survey, they asked, at what age does the average person become old? As you can see, 74% of a majority of participants said age 74. And, pretty much 69 to 74 was the bulk of respondents. And as we start living longer, as you can see on the other side, 85 was actually growing old. And this varies by each person. As people tend to live longer, as we get up in our ages, that idea of what we personally define as old also moves up. So as we'd mentioned, there are some things we lose as we grow older as a result of biology, things changing in our bodies, maybe reduced hearing, loss of vision, we lose our independence. Our idea of optimal health changes, whether that's with some limitations, we experience poor quality of health. Some people may experience mobility issues, and those are just some of the top that people talk about, but there are several others that you may think of. So in my dissertation research, I was particularly interested in looking at this idea of successful aging, which back in 2004 and 5 was all over the place. These were books you'd see at Barnes & Noble. They were the topic of conversations at aging conferences. And so I started immersing myself in this literature and realizing that based on these definitions of successful aging, the seminal work of Rowe and Kahn in 1997, as I reflected back on my experiences growing up in a small community in Alaska, I would try to think, would the elders I grew up with fit any of these definitions that was in the literature? And of course, they don't, for a variety of different reasons, which we'll talk about. But the definition of successful aging is you can have no disease today, or no disease in 5 years, which I think is kind of hard to predict, but that can be physical or mental disease. You can't have any disabilities. They said that most people they surveyed, successful aging was your children completed college, you paid off your mortgage, you paid off your car loans, and you're physically active. You can carry, I think it was 50 pounds up a flight of stairs in 20 seconds. So as we think about those things, the elders I grew up with, the people I know in my family and my community, have some of these things. So they would be unsuccessfully aging according to this research. As we think about these 5 criteria, do you or elders you know, or people in your family or your community fit this definition? It's not to say there are people don't fit this definition, because there are some people aging very well who are very healthy into their 90s and 100s. But the general population or racial and ethnic minority populations, most of them do not fit this definition. So thinking about those 5 things, as you reflect on your own life, as you think about the first question of, when you think about growing older, how would you define your own successful aging? What's important to you as you grow older? Successful aging can start when you're born. It can be something you start to decide to do as you grow older. But just kind of think about your own characteristics, own values, things that are important to you, to help you age in a good way or age well. So there's another survey looking more at the positive aspects of aging. What are some things that people look forward to as we grow older? These are positive views of aging among people ages 50 to 80. And of this survey, 88% said as they were growing older, they felt more comfortable being themselves. 80% of them said they had a strong sense of purpose. 67% felt more positive about growing older. And 65% stated that their life was better than they thought it would be. So despite the things we fear about growing older, the losses we experience, as we grow older, research is also showing we become more optimistic about our life circumstances. So as I'd mentioned, the introduction to this research is that I was really interested in how successful aging was conceptualized, how the definition was determined using a general population, and then how does that relate, or is it different than how Indigenous elders in Alaska define successful aging? And so through my dissertation research, I was really trying to figure out, Am I coming up with my own definition of successful aging based on their lived experiences? Am I trying to come up with a checklist that people could take and say, okay, well, I've done the first 10 things on this checklist. I'm on my way to age successfully. Those two things I didn't accomplish. One, each person has their own understanding of successful aging. So one definition is not possible, which is also what the literature is showing, is that every racial and ethnic group, every socioeconomic group that is researched to ask about successful aging, they all have their different perspectives. Rather, my research was really looking at this idea of what are the characteristics or values that people attribute to people who've achieved eldership. In all the interviews we did, all the elders we had talked to about this topic talked about someone else in their family, someone in their community who was aging much better than they thought they were, and they were doing things they looked up to. I determined that rather than defining successful aging, really we were looking at what constitutes eldership and what enables these elders to step into this role in their family and their community, which is equivalent to this Western notion of successful aging. So the research objective, which has now been going on, as I had mentioned, over 10 years, is to really figure out what it means to age successfully from the perspective of the elders themselves. There have just been a handful of studies over the years where researchers are actually sitting down with elders and asking their perspectives instead of applying theories and finding populations that fit that theory. As a result of this research, the dissertation established a successful aging model. And over the years, we've expanded it, we've edited it as we've expanded our scope of the project across different regions of Alaska. So this is Alaska. It's very large. It's over twice the size of Texas. If you laid it over the continental United States, or the lower 48, as people from Alaska call it, Juneau and Sitka on the bottom right would be over in Florida. The Aleutian Islands would be off the coast of California. And the orange up above Galena there, it's Ukqiavik or Barrow, would be above the Canadian border here in this area. And that kind of gives you how big it is in terms of size. The bubbles there indicate the regions we've worked in. The yellow are the communities we're starting to develop relationships now for a new grant we got this year. And they're all very culturally and geographically diverse. To give some more context, a flight to Anchorage to Barrow at the very top is a 3.5-hour flight, almost the same distance it is to Seattle. So it is very large. So to give a brief overview of the research part, we conducted 97 qualitative interviews. The age range of our participants was 48 to 88. And our average household was 3, but we did interview elders who lived alone, but we also interviewed elders in a multi-generational household of 13 people. As you can see, we have a good range of native languages spoken. In every community we've worked in, if a native language is the preferred language, we hire a local translator to work with us to translate all the research documents, as well as conduct the interviews and any community presentations and dissemination. 38% of our sample were men and 62% were female. This visual here gives a kind of a snapshot of the entire project. As you can see there's 5 main components of what is important to successful aging for Alaska Natives in those various regions. The first being emotional well-being, these contextual factors. Emotional well-being for them consists of not engaging in activities that are bad for your brain, such as, abusing substances that alter the mind, not thinking rationally before you make decisions or talk to people, and making sure that when you share or talk to someone, there's a purpose and a meaning behind what you're sharing, and there's a lesson to be passed down. Community engagement was important as well. This had to go both ways. Elders talked about, I need to make myself available to share my knowledge, to volunteer in the classroom, but the community also has to reach out to me and let me know they're interested in what I have to share. So this notion of generativity. Physical health was important, which we know, as we saw in Rowan Kahn's work, was one of the key factors for successful aging. But for this population of Alaska Natives, physical health was, everyone would love to have perfect physical health, but as long as it was a holistic approach, they were able to do as much as they could and they had all these four elements in their life, physical health wasn't as important. When we recruited our samples in all these communities, we steered away from a definition that was, we want people age 65 and older. We want people who are completely healthy or bilingual, or all these other benchmarks we thought were important to age well. So in our population, we did interview people who were homebound. A few of them had cancer, some other chronic diseases. So despite that, they still talked about aging successfully, even though they may have never left their house in 4 years due to mobility issues. Spirituality was also important for them to age successfully. This ranged from more Western practices of religion, such as going to church, all the way up to indigenous beliefs about spirituality, which could be spending time on the land, harvesting subsistence foods. And then finally, a native way of life was our fifth element that was added onto the dissertation model. And this is really looking at how do we translate the things we were taught by our elders into the new generation, and what do we hold on to if we no longer live at home. Native way of life was particularly important for elders who may no longer live in their home community or go back and forth. And so they were really trying to figure out, if I live in Anchorage and I'm from a rural community, what aspects of my native way of life can I have here, whether it's subsistence foods, gathering with people from your same community, or eating your native foods at home that are prepared and shared by others. So part of our research and all of our projects is we bring the data back to every community throughout the entire research process, from starting off with the research question all the way through disseminating, putting together community presentations, and even beyond. If we're writing a publication, we have a poster presentation, a conference presentation, every community that has data in those presentations is contacted and given the opportunity to review everything we've put together. So as a result of our research in this one region, they really wanted the data and the stories of their elders to be accessible to all ages, not just the people who participated, not just the families. So this here is a poster that we came up with in partnership with a community, Shaktoolik, and they wanted to summarize the lessons and experiences of elders in their community. And so this is a poster. We printed them out. We gave them several hundred to share with everybody. They're available to anyone who's interested. But this was one way that this community talked about sharing the data that wasn't academic. It wasn't a poster. It wasn't a paper, but it was something that was accessible and easy to understand. So this is the dissertation model of successful aging. As you can tell, it's very boxy. The four elements are the main components of what elders in Bristol Bay talked about being important to their ability to age successfully. So we have spirituality, emotional well-being, community engagement, and physical health. Within each of those four boxes, the surrounding boxes are the sub-themes or the examples the elders gave when they were providing examples of what this meant to them. As you can see, physical health is the largest theme there or characteristic, and it comprised of a lot of different things, not just physical health, but traditional medicine, native diet, feeling useful or optimistic, effective Western medicine and how that's delivered. So much more holistic approach than what the mainstream research on successful aging viewed physical health. So we brought all that information back. When I showed the dissertation model, the younger people understood what I was trying to convey to them, what I was trying to share. The older adults said, yes, all the content's there, but it's too busy. It makes no sense to us. And so through conversations with the elders, our elder advisory committee, the tribal councils, we simplified it. It is now just the circle, but I added the other four white boxes to give more context again to what each of those four characteristics comprise of. But they said everything's interrelated. If you were to take spirituality out of what we think is important to age successfully, we probably wouldn't be aging successfully. So all these are really intertwined together. So this is a more simplified version of what they were talking about. So as we think about aging, we kind of have a good idea of now of what Alaska Natives in this region and across other regions think influences their aging process, or what they think helps them age well. Other things they've talked about, and not only the elders, but literature, is our environment, whether it's the built environment, the natural environment, of course, humor. The impact of laughter on health and well-being is critical to our aging, family and community engagement, our diet. A lot of elders talked about younger people transitioning to a more processed foods diet and less reliance on subsistence, which was also not good for the elders' health because they're worried about their grandkids being healthy. Having a sense of optimism or feeling optimistic about the future, or even optimistic about today, despite what's happened. Accepting life as it is, accepting the lessons we've learned in our lives as a way of self-healing. It's important to think about how the history of our elders, whether that's boarding schools, trauma, addiction, all these things have influenced their aging process and their views on successful aging. Relocation, whether that's relocating temporarily for healthcare to be with family in an urban setting, or relocating permanently. Alaska has examples. Now we have climate refugees where some of our villages are being washed away due to erosion. And so they're relocating to either a different village or an urban center. Religion and spirituality, and then cultural values and practices also have an influence. So I'll provide some direct quotes from our elders to give you some more context to each of these themes. But the Bristol Bay elders talked about these 4 elements again. In terms of emotional well-being, one elder shared, people that are friendly and have a cheerful outlook seem to age better. View aging as another phase and are not bothered. It is just something that happens. In reference to their spirituality, this elder was talking a little bit more about the Western perspective, but they shared, you know that the old people who are religious keep going to church until they can't make it anymore. The ones I've seen were into their 90s who are still going to church. Church was also really important for their social engagement, a sense of support, sense of security, knowing they had people there that could help them if they needed. And when we talked about elder engagement or community engagement of elders, one elder shared, we get company. Like when you are sick, they'll help you. They don't leave you to be by yourself. When we did a lot of our interviews, several of them, community members, family members would come in and drop off food, check in on them, see if they needed anything. And then the 4th one, as we've mentioned, physical health. One elder shared, well, like I said, being active, getting involved in a lot of things, getting along with the grandkids and the other people, that's about it. So with Norton Sound elders, Northwest Alaska, their number 1 theme in terms of what successful aging was to them was having family involvement. So one elder shared, the more the children see us, what we are doing or what we are teaching them through our actions or work, they're able to see what we do. And the more I do things, that's aging well. So this elder was really talking about, we need to be a role model. So this idea of emotional well-being, you're always being watched. That's how they learned, watching their elders and being aware of the actions and what you say, because young people are watching you. And also to remain active, whether that's physically or mentally, because that's aging well. Emotional well-being, similar to Bristol Bay, one elder shared, it's more like I'm knowing that I'm helping them. And if they get older, they'll say, oh, I remember that. So similar to the other elder, leading by example, showing how to do things rather than explaining it to them, kind of lead by example, in hopes that one day when they get older, that young person who watched the elder will be like, I remember elder so-and-so did it this way. And that's his way of knowing his legacy is passed on, which contributes to his emotional well-being. With this notion of native way of life, one elder shared with us, an elder spoke to me about the beliefs that we have, the meaning of it. So each different elder gave me some knowledge that I used in my lifetime. There are guidelines I share with others on how to be elders. A lot of elders talked about, you need to pass on what you know, because once I'm gone, it's gone. And they don't want to take it with them because that's heavy baggage. So they want to make sure that you share your beliefs, your values, what you've learned, practical skills, really big focus on this idea of generativity. They also talked about physical health. One elder shared, I would tell them to keep moving and not just stay still. I want to encourage them to continue to do subsisting and eating subsistence foods as much as they can and not to rely on store-bought stuff all the time. This came out of that conversation about elders being worried about their grandkids preferring store food or processed meats like steak or hot dogs or pizza over their subsistence foods. Spirituality was also important. One elder explained what this meant to them. They shared, despite tragedies, life goes on. I think the prayers and best wishes of other people impacts each individually big time. And to age well, you don't dwell on the hurt in prayer. So again, this notion of acceptance, self-healing, learning from past experiences and past lessons in life and using those to move forward and heal. So we were invited to go to the Aleutian Islands as part of our second study. So we went out to 2 communities in the Aleutian Islands and the Pribilofs. And in that community engagement was really important to them. That was their primary characteristic of successful aging. And one elder shared, growing older healthy, as they said, is that I give you what I was taught when I was brought up. If we hold everything back, we won't age well, we won't be healthy. Similar to the research on redemptive narratives or sharing your experiences in recovery helps your own healing process. Similar to elders who are on that journey of becoming either an elder and stepping into eldership, that you pass on what you know, you don't want to hold it in. They also talked about physical health. As long as you're moving around, you stay young. When elders shared, you do the things you like, and then you stay young because your mind is active. So again, this idea that physical health also encompasses mental health, that we're physically active, you're also actively engaging your mental health in your brain and your mind. When they talked about emotional well-being, it was definitely similar to the other 2 regions, but much more focused on their environment and their family. And we think it's due to the extreme remoteness of the Aleutian and Pribilof Islands. But one elder shared, when my grandchildren come to the house, they're always all excited to come over and spend time with us. It makes you feel good about what you're doing for them and puts you at ease that you're doing right. It keeps you calm and stress-free. So this idea of emotional well-being in reference to their family is knowing that they are there to help with their grandkids, their own kids. They keep you busy, but you also know they're staying safe and being healthy. They also talked about this notion of native way of life again. One elder explained, they pass on down things to you, and you've got to pass it down to your kids. Everything you learned, you know. You could have a college degree and everything, but where you learn is your home. There's where you first start from you, your parents, grandparents, elders, you pass that on. And so part of our research was also really interested, every rural elder we've talked to equates urban centers like Anchorage, Fairbanks, or Juneau as places that are unhealthy, and most elders who go there never return home because they get sick and they pass on. But we were particularly interested in asking elders from our rural communities who have lived in Anchorage 5 years or longer, what does successful aging look like in an urban setting? For them, family was number 1. One elder shared, my grandkids keep me very busy, but I like it. I don't mind doing it with them. I'm happy. At least I get to meet and be with them daily. In regards to community, they miss their sense of community that small villages provide. So there were some challenges like this elder shared. No, it's scattered. Our community here in town is scattered. Here, we're all strangers, except people who are your relatives from the village or sometimes native people. So in Anchorage or other urban settings, it was really, you had to be very purposeful in creating your sense of community, finding people that had similar backgrounds to you. Rather than talking about a native way of life, the elders in Anchorage talked about a traditional way of life. And what they meant by that is, how do you maintain that important aspect of your life when you live in an environment where it's not as easily accessible as it would be back home? For example, an elder shared, and then it would help the elders pick them greens or pick something for them that they never eat for a while. And they just loved it. I miss doing that for them. And finally, in regards to resources, one elder shared, when I first came to Anchorage, I really didn't know there were so many different services for people, food stamps and all the other stuff, and good healthcare providers. So again, this is another example of working with the community and trying to figure out how do we disseminate this research in a way that's accessible to everybody. This is the word cloud we came up with in partnership with the community. Through our work over the years, we realized that successful aging is a term that most of our Native elders didn't fully understand. So through conversations, going through the interview questions, they helped us come up with asking it in a different way. So now we ask, how do you age in a good way or age like your elders? So as you've seen through the quotes or the research, a big part of what helps elders be successful in their aging process or feel like they're stepping into that role of eldership is this idea of generativity. And that's the 7th stage of psychosocial development. It was established by Erik Erikson in his work. And this is a time when usually in midlife to later life, you've used all your resources, your skills, things you've learned over the years in your job and your work, and you use those to improve the quality of society. For example, mentoring other people to do your job or passing on what you've learned through experiences either on the job or in life. The most generative thing people have in the world is having kids. That's a way of preserving your legacy. You raise them with the skills and knowledge you've acquired in your lifetime. From an Indigenous perspective and the research I do, I see it as teaching or leading the 7th generation. So thinking about what I teach today to young people or college students, 7 generations from now will be passed on in different ways. So I was particularly interested, okay, well, generativity sounds great. It sounds very similar to cultural values that we were taught being raised by our elders, things that our families expect of us in terms of helping others. So I went to the literature and I think there's 2 articles out there now looking specifically at cultural generativity. And this is more concerned with passing on traditions, values, and ways of knowing. This could be the ways of knowing or the values and traditions of a college campus, of being an American citizen, of going abroad to study. There are very different cultures of ways of doing, ways of being, which is a little different than other forms of generativity. For example, practical skills, which is where I would teach someone how to commercial fish, or I would teach them how to build a canoe. That's very practical. Similar to generativity, though, it is influenced by those who've come before us, and what we learn and how we pass that on will definitely influence those who come after us. So a mentor of mine and I, he is now here at University of Minnesota Duluth, Dr. James Allen. And I have looked at the research with Alaska Natives over the past several decades and kind of started thinking about how do we take that one step further? This idea of generativity is a core value in not only successful aging, but the People Awakening Project and looking at reasons for sobriety among Alaska Natives of all ages. And so looking at a culmination of research over the past several decades, we came up with this term, Indigenous cultural generativity. And we defined it as an elder who passes down values, subsistence practices, languages, cultural beliefs, spiritual beliefs, or any other activity that preserves and passes on the culture of the family and the community. What's a little bit different about this concept is that it's more focused on the culture of the family and community versus the individual passing on their individual knowledge they've learned over the years. This can definitely include part of that, but it's more concerned with this idea that you want to preserve and improve upon the culture you're raised in your community. Great examples in Alaska are elders teaching young kids the language now. After boarding schools and missionaries eradicated it, there's this big movement to bring it back, and elders feeling safe enough to teach that. So we're seeing among young people a resurgence of native languages. So that's preserving the culture of not only that family and community, but the Alaska Native culture or the Alaska Native language. So when we bring all this information back, as I'd mentioned, we also really encourage our community members, our participants in our research to give us suggestions on how does this actually work? How could we take these research findings and make them applicable to partners we work with, when we share with other people, when we give presentations? And so they talked about you can improve our ability to be generative by elder-youth interactions, whether that's letting elders volunteer in their classroom, give cultural demonstrations, volunteer, have places where the elders and youth can gather in the community and just visit. They also talked about grandparents spending time with their grandchildren. This is a little different than grandparents raising their grandchildren, where they need to have opportunities to just visit and be there and not be the guardian also, but have that natural relationship where they can do something without that other strengths on their relationship. They also talked about grandparents teaching their own adult children. Due to boarding schools, trauma, missionaries, a lot of other things that may have happened, there's been a disconnect between parents teaching their own adult children. So grandparents wanting to pass on family history, family recipes, traditional child rearing practices to their own adult kids who may not have that cultural background or cultural values they were raised with due to a variety of different circumstances. As someone who's a gerontologist and a social worker, another thing that elders keep saying is, why are young people so nervous around being around old people? Not sure why, but they always say, just have them ask us just who we are, where we're from, who's your family. Very simple questions will open up the door to have a fruitful and rich discussion with them about their experiences, their stories. That's another way of enabling them to be generative. We also need to work with our communities, our organizations, our long-term care facilities to provide opportunities for elders to be engaged, and to do that meaningfully by asking them, what are some meaningful activities that you would like to see? Is it teaching a class? Is it reading? Is it getting together and just having a cup of tea? But creating those opportunities for them to engage not only with young people, but engage with people from their same age group, their same community, or just engage with others in general. Well, that's kind of a large overview of the research. I do have several publications that are available. If we don't get to all the questions today, please feel free to email me. I'm very quick with answering email most of the time. Our website there, we do have a lot of these publications available, but would definitely be happy to answer any questions if there's any in the chat, or I can quit sharing my screen if people are able to ask in person as well.
Thank you very much for the presentation, Dr. Jordan, Dr. Lewis, excuse me. You showed a couple of diagrams that you indicated were simplified. For example, the one after the really blocky, the one you described as really blocky, and then it had a nice circular one that was a simplified thing there. As well as the fish diagram. And you mentioned that was simplification for people to understand the concepts that you were getting at. I'm curious to know if you shared any of the results with the participants or with people in the communities who did not participate, and whether they had any feedback about your findings. Were they in agreement, or did you get any contrary feedback?
Thank you. That's a great question. So this was established and simplified by our Elder Advisory Committee and the Tribal Council. But what we did, so as part of our research to make sure anyone who's interested in reading it or has access to it, for the dissertation, every village council or tribal council got a copy of the dissertation, but that at the request of the tribal councils and the Tribal Health Corporation in that region, I wrote the dissertation as a newsletter, and every household got a newsletter. And that really was a really simplified version of, I visited with, X number of elders in your community. Didn't say where the communities were to protect them, but kind of gave an overview of like, well, this community talked about these things the most, your community talked about this. We had opportunities to also invite community members to community presentations. So we, as a result of this adaptation of the model, we went back out, presented again. In every community I've been to since starting my work, is we have community presentations at the beginning, the middle, and the end. Provide food, we have gift cards, we have raffles. And usually, of course, not everyone shows up, but a lot of people do show up, ranging from grandkids of grandparents to young families to the older elders to visitors. That is a great way for us to also get community input. Not many people have had a lot of critiques or changes to the data for this project. They, similar with the salmon example, this was also shared. This actually, I didn't share the whole story. So this word cloud here is on, they said, well, you know, a poster is great. It would go in the elder lunch program, but then only elders would see it. And so they decided we would like to make it accessible to everybody. So we have this design on 500 berry buckets. It's on 500 hoodies in the community, and it's on 500 coffee cups. They felt that if you're picking berries and you see this, then yeah, I'm aging in a good way. If you see here, I think it says like food and laughter and happy, grateful, gratitude, that when you're picking berries, these will remind you of the things your elders want you to remember. Or you're standing in line at the post office or the store in the village, the back of your someone's sweatshirt in front of you is going to have this logo. Or you're at work and you're stressed out, you'll see on your coffee cup, there's these reminding you how to age in a good way. We did have another study looking at an elder needs assessment to develop an elder care facility in a region. The biggest critique of that study was, you know, we're tired of you coming out here to do research, asking us questions, and there's no results, which is understandable. They've been researched a lot. So over time, that project, in response to their concerns, and they now have an elder care facility, but it took a long time. But we definitely have had to navigate feedback that wasn't always positive. We've also had experiences with the alcohol-related project looking at reasons for sobriety in the region. And one community said, you know, this is great. We would love to be a part of your project, but our elders don't have a problem with alcohol, so you'll never ask those questions, and we'd prefer you not come back. So that was a very different response than the other communities in that region. But it took us a year to repair that relationship because they thought we had already collected that information. And so that took us a long time to, one, realize that maybe we had made the assumption that this was an area of interest for them, and without asking about the research question first. So in this study, not yet, we haven't, and I think it's because the majority of our responses to this type of work on healthy aging is that we're going out to communities and asking them what they're doing right or what elders are doing well versus focusing on a health disparity or something negative.
Well, thank you so much for your presentation. Thank you, attendees, for joining us during this alumni celebration presentation. I hope everyone has an excellent day.